Welcome to FS-ISAC's podcast, FinCyber Today. I'm Elizabeth Heathfield, Chief Communications Officer at FS-ISAC. Today we're joined by two guests, members of FS-ISAC who are at the forefront of preparing the financial sector for the rise of quantum computing. Peter Bordow, Distinguished Engineer and Chief Architect of PQC and Quantum Systems and Emerging Technology for Information and Cybersecurity at Wells Fargo, longest title ever, and George Webster, Chief Security Architect at HSBC. Not only are they both brilliant, but they both also play the guitar. In fact, you're listening to Peter play right now on this intro. Peter, George, welcome. First, can you guys just maybe tell me a little bit about yourselves?
Sure, thanks. I am the lead for the post-quantum cryptographic program here at Wells Fargo. I've been in the innovation and ideation domain as a chief architect for several years, now transitioned full-time to post-quantum cryptography. Recently, I've expanded my portfolio to also include things like artificial intelligence, digital identity, knowledge graph, Internet of Things, virtual reality, and other areas of research.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Well, I guess we're going to have you back again on all these other topics. And George, tell us about yourself.
Sure. So I'm George Webster. I'm the Chief Security Architect at HSBC. It's basically designing, orchestrating, understanding all the different facets of security of HSBC and how we go about it from a technology perspective. Before that, I was with the U.S. military for about 15 years, understanding the adversarial threats and how to kind of thwart them. And my background is in large-scale data analytics and offensive operations.
Wow. Great. So you guys are the perfect people to talk about this with. So everybody's talking about quantum computing and how it's going to change the face of everything. So I think we should probably just start with the basics. What is quantum computing?
I'll take that one, George, if you don't mind, and you can jump in as well. So quantum computing is a paradigm shift when it comes to computing platforms. So we live in a digital world of ones and zeros, binary code, right? In this world, it's very, very powerful, but it's also very, very limited. So in a traditional computation platform, all of the constructs, all of the formulas, all of the algorithms, all of the software are all written based on ones and zeros. Well, in quantum computing, you have ones and zeros, but you have a probability of ones and zeros. It's not an absolute environment. So that probability gives you the ability to do all kinds of very interesting calculations. Things like portfolio optimization and improved efficiency in search algorithms and pattern anomaly detections and things like that. Unfortunately, there are some very significant limitations to quantum computing platforms compared to our digital world. So one of the limitations is the inability to work with variables quite well. So at the moment, quantum computers don't work with a lot of variables, and so you have to carve up your equations or algorithms into small bite-sized chunks. They also don't work with large quantities of data. At the moment, there's not really an operational form of quantum RAM. So it's very difficult to deal with large data problems as well. The two are complementary. That is to say that quantum computers will not replace traditional computers, but they'll augment them, much like graphics processing does, right, in a laptop or in a desktop. And really, all of quantum computation is based on two fundamental principles of quantum mechanics. That's entanglement and superposition. So superposition gives us that sort of probability in between a 1 and a 0, where there's an uncertainty of what a particular qubit is doing at a particular time. And then entanglement is the phenomenon that allows bits to be entangled or correlated, if you will, where a measurement on one particle produces a correlated measurement on another particle most of the time. And these two phenomena, without getting into quantum mechanics or quantum physics, allow us to do kinds of computations that you can't do on traditional computers. One example would be, say, factoring very large numbers, right? So if you multiply two very large prime numbers together, you get a product. That's very straightforward, and digital computers do that quite easily. But if you go the opposite direction and you try and figure out the largest constituents the largest integers of a large number and try and factor them down. Traditional computers are very bad at that, and in some cases can take hundreds or thousands of years to take a very large problem. But quantum computers, as we've seen in proofs, could do that in a matter of minutes or a matter of hours. And that's really at the heart of what we talk about when we talk about this quantum threat. George, I'm sure you can add a little bit of color there as well.
Sure. I'll give the TLDR kind of summary. When we look at quantum and what is quantum, it's creating a fundamental shift. And, from the financial services sector, we've seen these shifts, every couple hundred years. They always happen. They always occur. When we're talking about quantum, there's a potential it can, damage or cause harm to the cryptography for transmissions and how we, work as a bank and guarantee that, level of trust. But there's other aspects as well. It can fundamentally change. As kind of Peter described, it allows a whole different way to process and calculate numbers and equations and algorithms. It doesn't replace, it absolutely augments, but it's in a way that we previously haven't been able to do it. So if we go back to, computer security and banking, at the end of the day, banking is, the broker of trust and security. Quantum is allowing it to have to now change. So when we look at it, how is it going to really change the world or change the future? I have no idea. I don't think anyone knows. But at the same time, we do know there are certain threats that are going to have to be adjusted, and there's certain opportunities that we can capitalize against. And that's when we talk about quantum, what we're looking at.
I hear people make the analogy to Y2K. Does that analogy, in that there's a lot of hype, everybody's really worried, it might change everything, but it also might not. Does that analogy ring true to you guys?
Hey, Peter, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump in there, and then you're totally going to crush it with the smartness. So I don't know if that's a good analogy, but I don't think it's a bad analogy, right? So again, financial services, banking, all that stuff, we're a broker of trust. That's fundamentally who we are and what we do, right? Y2K, we knew that something was going to happen, and we all spun up and we did whatever we could do to make sure that threat was mitigated. And that was through the entire IT estate. If we look at, quantum and how it can affect banking, yeah, I think you're looking at a Y2K instance where you do need to prep, you need to prepare, you need to make sure that level of trust and security that we're providing to our customers is still there. But I think it's kind of a false algorithm or a false example or corollary. But I think there's other examples as well. If you look at banking and you look through our past, just look at the Templar Knights, for example. We had the same thing where you had laws protecting the banking institutions within a country. All of a sudden you had pilgrims, going across international borders. It's the same thing. How do we start to adapt? How do we start to adjust? How do we start to protect, our customers and our assets and our transactions? It's something that we've done time and time again. Is it something that's a one-off? It might be nothing. Probably not. Something does need to fundamentally change, and we need to prepare for it.
George, that was a really great answer. Let me add a little bit of color too. I think going back to the original question, I think there are some parallels to Y2K. One of them is the sort of broad, almost ubiquitous nature of the problem, right? In Y2K, we didn't care about what system it was. It wasn't specific to a sector, wasn't specific to a particular industry or class or other division, right? And PQC is sort of the same thing, right? It's a financial problem. It's a medical industry problem. It's a insurance industry problem. It's a commerce problem. It's an everything problem. The one big difference, I think, in Y2K was kind of a line in the sand, right? There was this magic hour that was going to hit. And up to that magic hour, you had sort of the ability to mitigate. And then after the magic hour, it was too late, right? Here, we're talking about a different paradigm. We're talking about a long game. So that line in the sand, that Y2K parallel of what we call Q-Day, right? That's just the beginning. We're in this for the long haul. This is going to be a long-term cat and mouse game. We have really good understanding of the problems that we can prove on paper today. We also have a fairly good idea of what those threats may be in the short term. when algorithms become more mature and new things are invented. But what we really don't know is what we don't know. That is to say that, like on traditional computers, we have tens of thousands of production-ready algorithms that are out there, proven, right? In the quantum world, we only have a handful of algorithms, 20 or 30 or so. And so we're just at the very, very early stages. And quite frankly, we don't know what hasn't been invented yet. So yeah, this is a long game of cat and mouse.
That brings up the question, which I think is on a lot of people's minds, and certainly for CISOs who need to figure out how much they're going to prioritize getting ready for quantum, is like, when is this happening? Because people have been talking about it happening for a long time. Some people might say that it's already happening, and others will say, oh, it's 10 years away. So when is the start of the cat and mouse game, or has it already begun?
Yeah, George, if you don't mind, I'll take this first, and then happy to have you jump in. So when they talk about this 10 to 12 to 15-year runway, really what we're talking about is the iterative and evolutionary path of pure quantum systems. That is, number of qubits, the what we call the decoherence time, or the length of time that you can run equations on the computing platforms. And then there's a number of different modalities. There's like superconducting platforms, there's photonic platforms, there's captured ions, there's all of these different engineering approaches. And that's really what that estimate is based on. And one aspect of that is the unpredictability, right? And we know about Moore's Law, where the power of compute increases over a known period, right? It's a linear progression. Well, quantum computing doesn't work that way because it's such a new field. We get breakthroughs, and then we get some quantum winters. And so it's very unpredictable in terms of the increase of compute capacity. But there's another aspect to this, which is appearing on the horizon, not very well understood yet, but it's alternative approaches. So the use of heuristics and the use of hybrid algorithms and new approaches to fragment and recompose algorithms based on AI and machine learning. We're beginning to see some non-traditional or non-pure quantum approaches to breaking asymmetric encryption. And so, I don't like to say that the sky is falling, but I think that we're a lot shorter than 10 years away. That's my personal opinion. George, I don't know if you have a feeling on that too.
I'm kind of in the middle. So to sum it up, I think it is now. And I think there's certain things that need to be done and need to, happen. If you look at like your strategies, your direction of travel, there's absolutely certain areas, and pretty much all your areas, frankly, need to start to consider this threat and how you overcome it. At the same time, there's a lot of opportunity, and you also need to account for the opportunity. What actually materializes, when is this magical date? You don't really know. But that's true for, when a market shifts and new opportunities arise, you really don't know. But the same thing is true for any computer security thing. You really don't know what's going to be there tomorrow or even next year. And anything beyond that is, again, just silly. But we're kind of fortunate in this position of we do know these things are going to happen. Is it going to be tomorrow, next year, a decade, 100 years from now? Don't really know what that form is going to be. But we do have some good estimates. We do have some good understanding. And when we look at this from the horizon standpoint, a lot of what we're kind of recommending and even the approaches are common sense and stuff we should be doing anyway to create those opportunities for our business, but also to help protect our customers and our banking systems in the first place.
Yeah, I would just add one more thing, and I think this is relevant. What we call harvest now, decrypt later, right? And so we know there are bad actor entities, nation states, and large groups sponsored by nation states that today, as we speak right now, are capturing these encrypted data payloads with the understanding that they will be able to decrypt them at some future date, the date that we don't know, right, as we've just been talking. But really, that risk presents itself right now, right? And there's some pretty intelligent ways that the bad guys can sort of figure out what the potential high-value payloads are. You've got source and destination IPs, you've got transaction sizes and frequencies and things like that, where they can make educated guesses. So it's not just harvest everything, but it's really more of a semi-targeted harvesting approach. So we are actually concerned about that right now.
What kind of data is it? Like IP? What is the kind of data that would be valuable in a longer term time horizon that you think that the threat actors are potentially harvesting?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Like what kinds of data would that?
So what we did is we started with the FDIC's records retention schedule, which lays out the regulatory guidelines for retaining certain data sets, whether it's a mortgage application, an auto app, a financial trade, things like that. But then as we began to think about it a little bit, something like an automobile loan application doesn't just have financial information in it. It often, if not always, has personal information, perhaps even a social security number. And these things have value in pretty much in perpetuity, right? So it's really hard to say where those risks are, where those jewels are within these data payloads that would create a risk or a breach incident for a bank or a financial institution.
So basically any data, I mean, if you think about something like a mortgage application, that seems, I don't know, relatively benign, but actually these are the kinds of things that you really need to be thinking about, making sure that you store them securely for as long as you need to store them.
If you look at, banking, if you look at our financial systems, what is it? It's basically digital transactions, right? It's data. So fundamentally, at the end of the day, all in banking, how it functions, how it operates, it's all digitized, it's all protected, it's all encrypted. When Peter's talking about, hey, they're harvesting, you're potentially able to decrypt, what are they going after in that question? Well, what are they going after now? It's the same thing.
A lot of people, when they're like in the hype cycle, are talking about the risks in terms of breaking cryptography, but what about what the opportunities are? And you guys started to allude to it a little bit earlier, but I'd love to get into a little bit more detail about, what you think the upside is.
Yeah, I can kick this one off if you don't mind, George.
I was just going to say, kick it off and then I'll bring it back.
Yeah, that's cool. Obviously, I can't talk about what Wells Fargo is doing specifically in this area for competitive advantage, but I can tell you that generally speaking, in the financial industry, there's a lot of work being done on, say, Monte Carlo type simulations, on portfolio optimization, on probability distributions, looking at the performance of a particular financial instrument over a period of time, looking at the potential for market conditions to make turns at any given point, given some number of variables and so on. And these are fairly, common use cases. And I think all of the large banks are working on these sorts of things. And to a large degree, there's this balance between protected intellectual property and papers published for peer review. And I think there's a balance going on. So I think we're in a sort of incremental leapfrog thing, right? We build on the shoulders of great thinkers, and we ourselves make breakthroughs, and then we share them. And so I think there's a lot of work being done in this area. And we can circle back around to what I call proactive defensive use cases, so for intrusion detection and so on. But yeah, George, I don't know if you wanted to add something to that as well.
No, I think you covered it really well. I think there's two types of opportunities and benefits, and one is why we're here, right? It's to help enable that business. So from a business perspective, what are they able to do? Can they optimize portfolios? Can they, generate higher profit, get better returns, protect our customers better? That's all very, very true. If we bring it to more the near term, and kind of the rest of the audience here are the CISOs and the CIOs, and the risk is really, protecting that information. There's also opportunities here too. We know these things are going to come. So we now have, a desire or a drive that we can actually push, various things that's going to, bring protection that are usually not as sexy or kind of under the radar. Like, we know SBOM, we know, getting good inventory of our applications. We know, cryptographic key exchanges, rotations, all that stuff. It's a good opportunity, again, to use that to help better your state and get the emphasis and the resources on stuff that might not be the top priority.
Yeah, and in all of that, there's also the tangential use cases. So there's already a lot of advances and advantage being worked in the chemistry and material science areas. And so these things, while not directly related to financial ecosystem, investment opportunities, changes in, say, energy storage or materials processing or superconductors or fusion energy, all of these calculations are in some way connected to the financial industry as well. So it's not just finance, it's the entire ecosystem that we're keeping an eye on.
All right, so let's get into post-quantum cryptography, and let's just maybe back up a little bit for the amateurs over here. Let's talk a little bit about the state of cryptography in general and its place in cybersecurity today. And then, like, what is the threat that quantum computing brings to that?
So I'll take it, and then Peter will correct me, and he'll add like all the smart bits and pieces of wisdom. So, when you look at, computer security, right? Like, at the end of the day, we're here to protect and enable the business, right? Business is really why we're here. Our job is to protect and enable. Two of the key things and key ways we do it is through understanding the identity entitlements of like, who are you and, what rights do you have? And the other is to ensure like your safety, your trust, or security of your transactions, right? That former CIA model that we all know, love, and, use daily. So when we talk about quantum, we start talking about, being able to break, the underlying or the foundations of that trust, the encryption methods or certificates. It starts to erode everything.
Yeah, that's a really good answer, George. And I do want to underline one part of that. Again, at the end of the day, we do a lot of types of businesses, whether it's loans or savings accounts or whatever it is, right? But really, at the end of the day, we're in the business of trust. That's our bread and butter. If customers don't trust a financial institution, there won't be a financial institution. So really, if you take a step back and you look at this as a bigger problem, quantum computing presents a material threat to the ability for financial institutions to create and maintain that trust with its customers vis-a-vis all the things that George was saying about security and zero trust and identity and all of that.
That's a great answer. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the working group that you guys are chairing. First of all, tell me the genesis of it, and then we'll get into a little bit more about what you're working on and the first kind of set of documents that you want to release.
Yeah, I guess I'll start off there. So I believe it was the first quarter of last year, maybe even January, the December before. Wells Fargo, we've been in this research area in PQC for quite some time, and being an active member of FS-ISAC and knowing the real value that it brings to our organization and to the financial industry, we thought it would be appropriate to take this sort of, global risk that we're all dealing with and bring it to an organization like FS-ISAC and pitch the idea that we could all be in this together, right? And the metaphor that I like to use, we may not all be in the same boat, but we're all rising to the same tide, right? It's going to affect all of us. And so we were really honored to be able to contribute to the sort of the structure and the creation of this PQC working group in developing the mission statement, the goals, and really honored to be with George and helping to chair this organization.
So, it's not even to be honored, but to be able to work with individuals across the industry that, come and bring to the table so many good things and so much good knowledge, it's quietly just, absolutely an honor to do it. When I look at the group and what is the real goals here, we all have this problem and it's all a shared responsibility. The financial system and the financial network, it's not just one bank, it's the whole ecosystem. We all have this shared problem. So when we work in a group like FS-ISAC, it's how can we collectively start to tackle it? And when we look at kind of what are some of the key deliverables, we're all kind of selfish at the same time. It's what does it mean to the financial network, the financial system, our ecosystem, and how do we, start to get ahead of it, start to understand it and see what it matters to us. But how do you also start to look at some of those problems and how do we start to collectively tackle it so we don't have to all do it by ourselves? the same time is look at some of those opportunities. How can we start to capitalize on it, take advantage of it as well? And that's really the intention. And, as Peter said, it's being able to work with our colleagues and our peers and our great minds that we have, not in our individual silos, but across the whole ecosystem. It's just fantastic.
So let's talk a little bit more about the content of what you guys have been working on, in terms of, well, where do you start, right? I mean, you guys have, you're working on some documents that are recommendations for firms who are at an early stage. I guess we all are, and at some level we're at an early stage. So let's just talk through, like, what are the basics here? Where do you start if you're trying to get a handle on how this is going to impact your firm?
Yeah, how we started was we met as a group and we began to sort of list out, brainstorm or spitball all of the various aspects of post-quantum cryptography that a firm would want to think about. And it was a kind of a long list, and we sort of grouped them together and categorized them, and we came up with 7 what we call subgroups. And in the 7 subgroups, we have infrastructure inventory, we have risk register, we have current state, financial use cases, communications, and then education and awareness. And each one of those subgroups took a chunk of work that was related logically and began to sort of pull on those threads and develop some thought leadership in those areas. And so while each subgroup has an artifact, a deliverable, they are in fact coordinated, and they do sort of feed each other and build on each other. So it's almost like a mosaic. You can focus in on one area, say inventory, and then jump over to risk register with ideas on how to approach risk assessment, and then future state to look at mitigation strategies, how to divide up where your solutioning will go, and different areas like that. So it's really almost like a suite of artifacts that work well together.
Are there existing PQC standards that firms can look to if they're trying to, move to quantum safe cryptography or quantum safe algorithms? Or is that what we're kind of trying to develop here?
Yeah, so the short answer is no. The long answer is that there are a significant portion of the existing financial standards for the financial industry and information security that will easily adapt themselves to post-quantum spin, if you will, right? And we're actively driving a lot of those standards in X9, IEEE, in ETSI, IETF, and other associations. And it's a slow process. It's almost like tailoring a whole wardrobe of clothes. It's not one particular outfit that's going to work. You have to sort of make the same adjustments to the entire wardrobe. I guess it's like Metaphor Monday here. But really, there's a lot of great thought leadership going on in these standards bodies and organizations, and they are all sort of interrelated among each other. And things like interoperability standards, net new stuff for, say, quantum key distribution, side channel or out of band key distribution, things like that. New standards are being developed in addition to revising existing standards, and they're all in progress. And I think you're going to see a lot of those things sort of materialize over the next 2 to 3 years.
So let's talk a little bit more about what firms can do now. Where should they start? Is it about, an asset inventory and knowing what you've got? Kind of walk me through like the kind of basic steps of where they should start.
Yeah, I can start off, George. So I think that's a really excellent question. And I think conventional wisdom says that it's almost like a layered approach, right? You begin with discovering the risk landscape, like what assets, whether they're crypto or data, are at risk, right? In an enterprise the size of, say, Wells Fargo or one of our competitors, that's no small task, right? We have an enormous enterprise with an enormous number of endpoints. We have third-party vendors. We have what I'll call out-of-band situations like ATMs and other kiosks and things like that. But discovering all of that can be a really daunting problem. And so that's probably the first area to look. And then we build on that with risk assessment, right? Risk modeling. Where are the real pressing threat vectors? That gives rise to prioritization for mitigation. Now, in all of that, you need to consider solutioning as well, right? This is not one size fits all. You're not just going to drop an algorithm in off the street, have it work, right? There's different characteristics that are really important for different kinds of use cases. So whether you have a mortgage application or a low latency latency trade, you're going to have different requirements. And so the PQC algorithms they offer a lot of variety, and they offer a lot of solution space. But again, it's not the end all be all. You've got things like better quality entropy generated from quantum sources, which increase the robustness of your security material, your key material overall. You've got communication security, so things like quantum key distribution or out-of-band key exchange, things like that. And I know George can come up with a whole list of things in this area. I do want to point out one thing, and this goes back to the standards question as well. X9 is working on a new flavor of TLS certificate that offers dual signatures within the certificate that allows you to switch between two encryption algorithms, which goes to crypto agility, right? The ability to be nimble, the ability to pivot down the road, right? This is not a one and done, as we keep saying. Everything that you do, you should approach as though you're going to have to do it over and over and over. And that's really going to be the secret to success here in the long game.
I think that's a really good answer. To bring it back to, what it means and, security, we still have all of our controls. We still have our risk assessments or risk understanding. And I think some stuff is going to fundamentally change, but it's going to be more on the implementation and how we actually bring it. It's what can we do now if I'm a CISO or, a chief architect starting to look at my estate. It's starting to understand where is this actually going to affect me and where it's going to hit, because we don't necessarily know where, but we do know that there's certain artifacts or certain things that are going to be put at risk or going to need to potentially change. And so how can we go out there and start to catalog it? How can we start to add, additional implementations to our control or different capabilities where we can actually say, okay, here are all the applications that are using these forms of encryption. Here's all the different things that are communicating in these different ways. These are all the various things that we're going to need to start to understand. And then exactly as Peter's saying, is take a risk approach. So it's not throw everything out the window. It's not, I need to buy this next product, good or service. It's really starting to probably understand your prioritization and understand what are some of those capabilities you have, get them higher up the radar, and maybe enhance or adjust some of them. The big one, again, is where is all your crypto? What are all the different pieces that are going to be potentially affected by it? And start there. Start figuring that out and start cataloging that.
Yeah, and I think we've got some tools in our toolkit already to start dealing with, and we talk about the harvest now, decrypt later. So obviously key sizes can be increased. That's easier said than done in many circumstances, but that buys us some time. And then we talk about like key rotation, limiting the number of messages encrypted with any particular key, right? Key separation, right? Dividing up keys for specific use cases. Ephemeral keys, right? Which are generated asymmetric keys, use them once, toss them. Side channel distribution, all of these things.
Burners.
Yeah, exactly, right? So it's not like we don't have any tools to work with, but we can certainly reduce our risk in the short term while we prepare for the long term.
What do you say to, so it's one thing to be a giant global bank who has the resources to throw at this and really start thinking about this. But what do you say to people who might believe that it's more of a nice to have versus a critical activity right now, or who don't have the resources to be able to they don't have like whole teams who can actually analyze this stuff? What do they do?
I think they're not going to be a bank very much longer. To be really blunt, like if you look at it, right, a lot of the same controls, the same methods, the same things are there. If you go to, it's not even SANS top 20 anymore, but it still recommends, like, do you have a good inventory? Number 2 is, do you have a good inventory and understanding of your application? Those things are still true. Quantum is putting more emphasis on it, but those are still number 1 and number 2. So if this is something you're not paying attention to and not looking at, keep in mind you're a broker of trust and security. You probably do need to start to prepare for it and start to understand what's going to potentially come ahead. The good news, though, is we're all in this together because, what affects one bank affects the entire financial system. We're all working on it. We're all supporting each other on it. So yeah, you do need to pay attention for certain things to start going at it, but it's to remember that you're not in it by yourself.
That is such a smart answer, George. One thing that I would mention that if you are a very large financial institution, these cryptographic transitions can take a decade or more, right? Because of the size and extent of your enterprise. If you're a smaller financial institution or a community bank, you may not have that same widespread landscape of risk, right? Yours might be somewhat more well-defined and well-contained. So you may not have to throw the same amount of research or mitigation strategy at this moment, right? Maybe wait for some standards to be defined. If you don't want to drive the standards, wait for them to appear, wait for them to be adopted. But to George's point, a lot of what is involved here isn't just PQC specific. We're talking about best practices. Whether we talk about having your crypto inventory, knowing where all your certificates are, or whether we're talking about an agile environment so that you can deploy new algorithms and such, or if you've got a centralized CI/CD pipeline or application build process. And this is not smoke and mirrors. This is not rocket science. These are almost best practices. And if you need to use PQC, not as an excuse, but as an enabler to develop these best practices and best architectures, say go for it.
Great. I mean, that was fantastic. Is there anything else you guys want to add? Here's your chance. You're speaking to, the people who you hope are going to be reading these documents and, using the work that you have done and implementing it in their own environments.
Well, I'll start, George. I know that you have some value here, but let me just say this. It might be obvious, but reach out, ask questions, do a little research. I mean, we stand ready to support the financial industry, not just George and myself, but every member of FS-ISAC. We all know that we're in this together. And so while you may not want to drive this mitigation strategy, if you have questions or concerns, do not hesitate to reach out.
Really, really similar vein. Like, hold down, Peter. So the one thing I'd say, and really like to close it off.
Like you guys have a mind meld.
And no, he's really smart. So, and I guess it goes to the point of like, what do we actually bring here? Like, what's the closing thought is I'm frankly humbled by all the different financial institutions and some of the people and even the caliber of people that they brought to start to work on this. We have people that are absolute experts in their domain kind of working together to start to tackle this problem and also to start to look at some of the opportunities as well. It's not just doom and gloom. It's just kind of a thank you for the people that are presenting, the people that are participating, the people that are, working, hand in glove with us. But it's also the others that do reach out. And kind of one of the opportunities I think here is, we're not in this alone. We are all in this all together. So as Peter described, like, please do reach out. Please do chat with us. If you have questions, you don't have to be, waiting on us for, the next publication. You can reach out to us at any time. You can participate however actually works out for you.
That was great. Thank you both so much. And thank you for dedicating your time to this because, it's not your day job by any stretch. And, I think it's pretty, says a lot that, you guys are all getting together to protect not only, financial firms themselves, but their customers. So thank you on behalf of people who have money in banks worldwide.
Thanks for the opportunity to share.
Thanks so much to Peter and George. That was a fascinating conversation. If you still think quantum computing is just too complicated, you're right. I'll leave you with a quote from quantum physicist Richard Feynman. If you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. If you like this podcast and want to hear more from FinCyber leaders around the world, subscribe to FinCyber Today on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also find them as well as articles by other thought leaders at fsisac.com/insights and also follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter. Thanks so much for listening and hope you learned something.